They vanished for months, then washed up with a dead man's confession, a ghost ship, a mummified corpse, and a notebook with its most damning pages ripped out. The truth behind the El Fausto's final hours will haunt you long after the video ends. Miss the last 60 seconds and you'll regret it. On July 20th, 1968, the fishing vessel El Fausto slipped away from the port of La Palma Island, its wooden hull slicing quietly through the Atlantic waters as it headed south toward the nearby island of El Hierro. A routine journey, a simple errand even, a handful of hours to transport agricultural combustive materials. Just another day's work for seasoned sailors like Ramon Hernandez, Eliberto Hernandez, and Miguel Acosta, who had cut their teeth on these waters since their teenage years. These men were more than crew, they were family. Brothers and cousins whose veins throbbed with the pulse of the ocean. And yet, destiny had coiled itself around their modest voyage, hiding its fangs beneath the surface of what appeared to be a short round trip. Their delivery was smooth. The sea was calm, the air mild. They reached El Hierro by the early evening, unloaded their cargo, grabbed some food, and began prepping El Fausto for the return trip. That's when a desperate voice cracked the still air. A man, breathless and pale with panic, raced down the dock toward them. His name was Julio Garcia. His face was the face of a father gripped by fear, his voice carrying the kind of urgency that slices straight through the heart. Julio begged them for passage back to La Palma. His daughter was sick, gravely so, and he had missed the last ferry home. The next would not arrive for 2 days, and time was a luxury he no longer possessed. Without hesitation, the crew of El Fausto welcomed him aboard, not out of charity but out of solidarity. These were island men, cut from the same cloth, their lives rooted in the same salt air and coastal rhythm. Julio helped them reload food and water, just 22 pounds of fruit and a modest supply of fresh water. The boat was small, the supplies limited, but they weren't going far. At 2:30 a.m. on July 21st, El Fausto slipped again into the Atlantic, its bow pointed north toward home. But home never came. By 10 a.m., when they were expected to dock at La Palma, there was no sign of them. The boat's owner waited on the dock, mildly puzzled but not alarmed. He had sailed many times with the Hernandez brothers and Miguel. These were not green sailors. Maybe they had engine trouble. Maybe they took a detour. The owner assured worried relatives that it was nothing serious, yet he still sent out a search boat along the same route El Fausto should have traveled. That search boat found only emptiness and mist. The Atlantic stretched out like a silent accomplice, offering no sign, no sound, no debris. El Fausto had vanished. Then came the first miracle. On July 25th, for days after El Fausto had disappeared, a British vessel called Duquesa made radio contact. They had found the missing boat 120 miles west of La Palma. Not only was El Fausto intact, but the 4 men on board, Ramon, Eliberto, Miguel, and Julio, were alive and even smiling, waving flashlights and greeting the British crew. Though dehydrated and starving, they were in remarkably good spirits. And then came the strangeness. When the crew of the Duquesa offered to tow them to shore, the men on El Fausto declined. They insisted the boat was fine. No damage, no mechanical issues, just some supplies needed: food, water, and fuel. Even Julio, the father who had been frantic to return to his sick daughter, declined the offer. He too said everything was fine. The captain of the Duquesa was baffled. He pressed them, demanded answers, asked how they could have drifted over 100 miles off course without something going terribly wrong. They gave none. Their words were polite but firm. They were heading home on their own, so the Duquesa obliged. They handed over food and 18 hours worth of fuel, then watched as El Fausto turned eastward toward La Palma and disappeared beyond the horizon. The captain radioed La Palma with the expected arrival time, around 7 p.m. that evening. When word reached the island, a celebration broke out. Families rushed to the docks, wine bottles opened, songs sang into the twilight. But 7 p.m. came, then 8, then midnight. The sea remained silent. El Fausto never arrived. The next morning, fear snapped back into place like a rubber band pulled too far. Spain launched its largest maritime search operation in history. Military planes, civilian ships, coastal patrols, all scoured the waters where the Duquesa had seen El Fausto just the day before. But the ocean gave nothing back. For 2 weeks they searched until finally the effort was called off. El Fausto was declared lost at sea. 4 men were presumed dead, once again swallowed by the same sea they had tried to cross. Then, nearly 3 months later, a second miracle surfaced. On October 9th, an Italian merchant ship called Anna de Mayo spotted a tiny fishing boat drifting alone in the vast Atlantic. It was thousands of miles from where it should have been. As the Italians approached, they read the name etched into its hull, El Fausto. There was no one on deck, no movement, no figures, only silence. 2 Italian sailors boarded and found the boat in surprisingly good condition. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no damage, just a ghost ship drifting in defiance of physics and logic. They opened the cabin and found it barren. No logbook, no clue. Then they descended into the engine room and were met with a scene that would haunt them forever. Lying on his back, unclothed and partially mummified, was a dead man clutching a transistor radio to his chest. The smell was overwhelming, the sight horrific. Beside the body, a small notebook had been placed. Strangely, 28 pages had been ripped from its center. The remaining pages offered little. Some basic calculations in the front, and a final page, rambling, sorrowful, vague, farewell. The Italians towed El Fausto toward Venezuela, intending to deliver the corpse and the notebook to Spanish authorities. But fate once again intervened. 2 days into the journey, El Fausto lurched forward suddenly and sank without warning. The towline snapped, and the boat disappeared beneath the waves in seconds. The dead man went with it. No body to retrieve, no boat to examine. Only the notebook remained. Back on La Palma, Julio Garcia's wife identified the handwriting in the notebook immediately. It was his. She recognized his unique penmanship. She knew the notebook. It was where he tracked payments for his work as a mechanic. She read the final page with trembling hands. It contained instructions: how to access insurance, which properties to sell, what to do with his belongings. And then, at the very bottom, one final plea: don't ever tell our son all that has happened to me. You know that God wanted this fate for me. Love you. The questions erupted like waves during a storm. If Julio knew he was about to die, why not leave a fuller explanation? Why not say what had happened to Ramon, Eliberto, and Miguel? Why didn't he take the time to document the truth for the families left behind? Why were 28 pages ripped out of the notebook? Who removed them and why? And why, when safety was literally floating beside them in the form of the Duquesa, did they refuse the tow? Why did Julio, whose child lay sick back home, turn his back on the very rescue he had so desperately sought? Some believed the crew panicked, that small misfortunes snowballed into irrational choices, that the vastness of the sea played tricks on their minds, and fear metastasized into poor decisions. But that explanation feels brittle. It doesn't answer the silence. It doesn't explain the notebook's missing pages. It doesn't account for the serenity with which the men faced the Duquesa's crew, nor the mystifying detachment that followed. Other theories pull darker threads. That El Fausto stumbled upon something it wasn't meant to see. Smuggling routes, military secrets, something criminal, something dangerous. That someone with power or desperation intervened. That Julio's final note was not just goodbye, but submission. A man silenced, a truth buried. The Atlantic is not just a body of water. It's a graveyard, a stage, and a vault. El Fausto entered it with 4 living men and returned with 1 corpse and a mystery deeper than the trench it disappeared into. It offered a glimpse, a flash of torchlight in the night, and then it closed its mouth again. The sea does not confess. It never has. It never will. Now tell us, why do you think Julio Garcia refused rescue, knowing his daughter was gravely ill? What happened to the other 3 men aboard El Fausto? And who ripped out those 28 missing pages? And why? Do you believe this was madness at sea, or something more, something buried deeper than truth itself? Share your theory in the comments. And if this mystery left you unsettled, subscribe, because we're only beginning to unearth the ocean's darkest secrets.